Hey everyone, thanks for joining the session from Veeam. I'm Michael Cade. I'm a senior global technologist at Veeam Software and I sit within our product strategy group. And today our session is going to be filled with slides, but we're going to get to touch on, well, what do we mean by cloud data management from a techie's point of view? But also, more importantly, we're going to get into what v11 looks like and what's actually coming there, as well as looking at a bit more about the whole data management platform that we have going on at Veeam at the moment. 2020 has been a busy year from a development point of view, so let's get straight into that. Contact details down below. Reach out on Twitter, email. More than happy to help and answer any questions where I can. So those, and I'll quickly go through this. This is just a history lesson. If you haven't heard of Veeam, we've been around for a while. We started off protecting those virtual workloads, namely VMware, then Hyper-V, and we've done bits around Nutanix HV more recently from a virtualization point of view. And then over the last, let's say 4 to 5 years, we've really focused in on that data center, physical machines, endpoints, being able to protect those Windows, Linux machines, but also think about those legacy platforms as well around AIX and Solaris, being able to protect them. As much, even more so, a focus around the enterprise applications. So Oracle RMAN, being able to protect those in the most efficient way possible. And then I think 2018 was probably just that birth or the start of that mainstream adoption rate of the cloud. And what I mean by that is the public cloud, but also leveraging cloud service providers to offer a backup as a service or DR as a service or something as a service, as well as SaaS, not the something as a service, the software as a service. So things like Office 365. And this is where I'm going to touch on to begin with in the session, just to really focus on where we're going and where, as well as we're not going away from virtualization. Many of you on the session will still be very much in that world of making sure that you're getting the most out of your VMware investments and your storage investments. That's not going away from a Veeam point of view. We're just bolstering that so that we're ready for when you do and potentially move into more of a public cloud native or SaaS-based offering. So this is a kind of a mind map of everything that we talk about from a cloud point of view, or virtualization, or physical, or SaaS, needs an element of protection. The shared responsibility model, whether that be you looking after the infrastructure, whether it be a vendor such as Microsoft, AWS, or Google looking after the actual hardware, the data centers, and the same for the SaaS-based workloads, is we still need to protect that workload. So that's where the cloud data management story starts from a Veeam point of view. And it really starts with backup and recovery, making sure that we can do that in the best possible way we can, being very efficient, very fast to recover, being very granular about what you recover and how you recover that, so that we're efficient from not only a time perspective, but we're only bringing back the data we need, as well as that's going to massively impact on cost, on how do we bring that data back in the most efficient way. To be able to understand where that data is, there's going to be a level of monitoring and analytics into that, as well as the governance and compliance of that data. Where does that data reside? Where does it live? Why are we keeping it? How long are we keeping it for? And then abiding by the regulations within your country, whether that be GDPR or just personal identifiable information across the world. We probably need to be a little bit better at how we govern ourselves about how we store that data and how long for. Then how do we enable you guys to be able to freely move those workloads, whether it's from a physical to virtual, whether it's from a physical virtual to cloud or cloud back to virtual, and so on. And having that portability, that cloud mobility, as our marketing team like to call it. But really it comes down to portability. How do we move those workloads freely between these different assets to be able to, well, create a better business outcome from that? And then on top of that, well, how do we orchestrate that? How do we make this seamlessly happen based on an event? How do we make a machine or a group of machines, an application group, move from site A to site B based on cost, based on efficiencies, based on weather forecast, based on something. How do we automate that rather than it being a manual process, which it very much still is today? Right, so back to the product side. So we've been really quite busy so far in 2020. It's amazing what a pandemic can do to a development cycle. So you'll see here a long list of different products that have come out throughout the year, and a lot of these just filter into our key product stakes or platform. So you'll see Veeam Availability Suite, which consists of Veeam Backup and Replication, as well as Veeam for that monitoring and analytics, but ultimately everything resides in there. The Nutanix HV is now part of that availability suite as well, being able to protect those workloads, but that had to come out as a version 2 for us to be able to do that. Service Provider Console, this is our way in which our service providers manage that backup as a service, infrastructure as a service, and the backup on top of that, DR as a service. How do we have more control over that for our service providers? Veeam Backup for Azure. So we've already, prior to 2020, we released Veeam Backup for AWS. So we already had version 1. You'll see on here as well, version 2. But you'll see, and these are focusing on native cloud IaaS. So being able to protect Azure virtual machines or AWS EC2 instances. We've got a bit of news later to just touch on that third one that I haven't really mentioned yet. Agents for Solaris, Veeam Availability Orchestrator. How do we enable disaster recovery, business continuity, and automate and orchestrate that failover of this, not just a virtual machine, but let's take that whole application group, that whole stack, and move that over to a secondary location. And then the agents for AIX as well. So these are already GA. They're out there and they've been there for the majority of 2020. Another big bit of news that I wanted to mention was around our focus and a recent acquisition that we made with Kasten. So Kasten focused on Kubernetes and cloud data management from that point of view. And in particular, they focus not only on the infrastructure, which is probably where we traditionally live, the operations, the infrastructure people, the backup admins is where Veeam really play, and that's where we've been so successful with you guys in the community. But this is a different approach. Kubernetes is a completely different approach in general. So it's about being able to discover those applications that are out there. And an application in a traditional sense might have been one server with a domain controller, with some DNS, maybe a web front end. And all of that makes up this application, maybe 4 or 5, maybe that traditional 3-tier app that we know from a virtualization or from a today's infrastructure. That's completely different in the container world. Those containers can be hundreds, thousands of small moving artifacts that need to be protected in a consistent manner. So that's where Kasten comes in to be able to do that in a much better way than what we can do from a Veeam Backup and Replication. But there's some interesting integration coming down the line, and I won't spoil it too much there because there's a lot more to do before we get to that. But it's very simple. It's very much the same ethos that we have from protecting the data, moving that data, disaster recovery, replication, monitoring, having visibility into what that environment is doing. So then keeping on to that cloud story, although obviously Kasten can work on premises for Kubernetes environments as well. I've already kind of touched on AWS and Microsoft Azure, and we've got some interesting stuff coming around AWS, hopefully before the end of the year, around version 3, which focuses around RDS and being able to protect PaaS and VBC type configurations, not only that Amazon EC2 instance. The Azure version 2 just changes some of the similar to what we did in AWS version 2, harmonizes the snapshot and the backup replication. It's really about making sure that it's more cost efficient for everything that we're doing in there. And then at Veeam or maybe Veeam Live, just recently, a few weeks back, we announced that same IaaS protection for Google Cloud. So very fast moving public cloud, especially over here in Europe. We obviously wanted to be able to protect those workloads within there. So yeah, as I mentioned, the upcoming launches that hopefully, fingers crossed, we see these before the end of the year. AWS version 3. So anything that you see in version 3 is a good way of thinking where the Veeam backup for Microsoft Azure is going, and then ultimately where Veeam backup for Google or GCP, Google Cloud Platform, will also be going. But there really are focus points around being able to protect built in the cloud, or being able to protect those workloads from a snapshot point of view using the native cloud storage snapshot engines, but then also being able to offload those into that same VBK format that we back up our physical machines to, and our virtualization. And that gives us the ability to help with that portability and that workload mobility of being able to directly restore a machine from anywhere to anywhere. So we can take a backup from an AWS EC2 instance, and we can instantly recover that into vSphere on premises using our external repository, but also our VBK. So also on the cloud front, so what else can we expect towards the end of the year? Hopefully, again, fingers crossed, is the new version of Veeam Backup for Office 365. So this has been it's a relatively new product for us, although you see that it goes back to like 4 years. It's still very much our fastest growing product. I think I saw 85% year-on-year growth, so you can understand how people are also migrating their workloads into Office 365 to leverage that. Probably even more so in 2020, take that burden of having to actually look after and manage that underneath. But the big point of version 5 is really around Microsoft Teams. So we've already got the ability to protect Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and coming in and being able to protect directly to object storage as well as disk. That was there first. But this focus was around Microsoft Teams. And this was part of the roadmap before a pandemic, which really focuses on us needing this way of being able to collaborate within our business. But we were already there. We were looking at how we did this. Yes, we had a way of being able to do this using our Veeam Explorer for SharePoint, but ultimately it wasn't as granular. It wasn't as easy to use as what our Microsoft Teams support will bring to the party when version 5 lands. This will give us a Veeam Explorer for Teams, as well as being able to individually understand a bit more about how the team structure looks and being able to restore granularly back into the team's infrastructure. So what else can we expect? So I've kind of touched on Veeam Backup for Office 365 version 5. I've touched on Veeam Backup for AWS. So think about those application consistent backups, RDS support, VPC support. Veeam Backup for Azure. One of the things that we did with Veeam Backup for AWS version 2 was integrate that into Veeam Backup Replication, something that you might hear us talk about platform services. And that really enables us to just deploy Veeam Backup for AWS from VBR. So that's coming to Azure as well, and being able to manage that and be able to see it from that one console, that one interface. v11, which we're going to get into, I promise, shortly. Veeam agents there's a new agent for Mac, which we may touch on in the session. Updates to how we integrate into Oracle RMAN from different areas. We already have that today for the mainstream, but there are still a lot of RMAN or Oracle users out there that run on AIX and SAP on Oracle. The Veeam Availability Orchestrator version 4. So we've just recently released version 3, which was the exclusive to NetApp and ONTAP, and how we could orchestrate and use those storage snapshots and replication engines to move that data from site A to site B and have all of the automated process and tasks around that. CDP support is the big one there. You'll see that down in the V11. There's no there's a huge link between them two products, so keep an eye on what we're doing on both. Veeam Backup for GCP, so cloud native backup for GCP, being able to back up those IaaS workloads within Google Cloud Platform. And then as well, Veeam Service Provider, being able to for service providers, be able to centrally manage, deploy Linux and Mac agents, be able to look after those AWS and Azure, and obviously down the line, expect to see GCP there as well. Okay, so we've been talking about v11, it seems like, for a while in 2020, given that we've been on all of these virtual events. Three big things that we demoed at Veeam this year, earlier June, I think, around this year. But we've been talking about this first one for a number of years, actually, as a project, as about where we're going, what we want our platform to be able to achieve from a data protection point of view. And that first one is around continuous data protection. There's lots of content out there. Anthony Sabteri did a great VMworld session back in 2018, touching on what the architecture looks like, and it's not changed much at all, other than how we've been working with VMware on the VAIO filter to be able to enhance that and make it more scalable, and everything else that we're doing there to enable that continuous data protection, be able to send that data. So think about this as the ability to obviously back up, the ability to replicate is already in the product, Veeam Back and Replication. Veeam Availability Orchestrator gives us another way of wrapping all of those workloads together in, let's call it a bubble or an application group, to send it over to a secondary site. But for those mission critical systems, those tier one applications, we might want to get down to the seconds and maybe minutes, rather than the minutes and the hours that we probably see from a run-of-the-mill application or database server. Those tier ones are really where this CDP angle fits. And I'm going to get onto a little bit more around the archival piece as we move on. Instant recovery has been a massive thing from a Veeam point of view. Instant recovery of NAS is coming, and instant database recovery. And there's a lot of content again out there around that, as well as this enhanced object storage. So this will give us an archive tier to our existing scale-out backup repository. So today we have our performance tier, which is on premises. We have our capacity tier, which is object storage, S3 compatible, Azure Blob, or AWS, or basically any S3 compatible storage. With version 11, we're bringing out the archive tier, which will allow us to drop down into Glacier or Azure Cold Archive, or whatever that's called, but ultimately giving us the ability to leverage that deeper, colder storage for cost, really, for longer term retention, as well as adding GCS, so Google Cloud Storage, as that object storage offering for the capacity tier. Okay, so prior to getting into the platform piece, there's obviously a lot of enhancements around the engine, around making things faster. Remember, we're software defined, so we're not reliant on any hardware specifics. It's kind of bring your own kit. Lots of engine enhancements, lots of UI enhancements. So I'm going to quick fire go through some of these features that are coming, and you'll notice a trend around Linux here. So firstly, in version 10, we brought out the ability to offer immutability for our capacity tier, namely using AWS Object Lock APIs, as well as some S3 compatible storage that also brought that feature. Biggest ask that we had was around, well, what about the performance tier? How do we make that immutable? So we didn't want to be locked into any specific storage or any specific compute or hardware in particular. So we went away and we researched around how do we do this from a Linux point of view. And we've made it extremely, very easy to do this. Even me, from a non-Linux background, kind of a novice when it comes to it, this is super simple to set up. And it really does exactly that. It doesn't allow you to delete those, protecting you from a ransomware point of view, but also from any insider threats. And there you go. That's just defining what it is and how it looks, how we flag that immutable flag within Linux. Another piece is around the Linux file restore. Whenever we needed to do that, because for the most part, Veeam has always been very Windows centric. Management service still is required for management, but every other aspect, pretty much, apart from tape as well, it can be stored on a Linux machine. So we've taken advantage of that from a Linux file restore point of view. Before, we needed a FLR appliance, a file level recovery appliance. to spin up as a very small virtual machine. But now we've got so many other managed services in there that we can afford to, well, let's use one of them for that mounting operation to be able to see inside that file system. The data integration API, how do you get more out of that data? So in version 10, this was completely supported to present these backup disks and the contents of them disks out to a Windows machine. Now we're enhancing that from a Linux point of view so that, and to be fair, most of those mining applications, mining services are going to be Linux as well. So you can see in the screenshot that I'm using an Ubuntu machine, but I'm actually exposing a backup file from a CentOS box so that you can then see inside of that and then do some mining around what that data is. Backup proxy was a big thing again in version 10. We introduced the ability to use hot-add, so virtual appliance mode, to be able to use a Linux proxy rather than that Windows piece. Now we've opened that up. The ability to use direct storage for our storage integrations, but also virtual appliance and network as well. So this will open up the door, and you can start to see that now the platform doesn't just need to be completely Windows centric, and it can be, apart from the management and a few other little small components in there, but ultimately it's around broadening what we can do from a Linux point of view. Another quick one, but very important, is that we've enhanced our storage integration. So today, with our storage integration partners, our alliance partners, we have a lot of good stuff that we can do from a VMware point of view. NetApp in the picture, but this goes for Pure Storage, this goes for Dell EMC, and the list keeps on continuing to grow. What we wanted to also do was introduce integration into our NAS backup, which came in version 10, but also agent backups, those physical database servers, physical servers that have a storage LUN presented. How do we enable better or more efficient backups leveraging storage snapshots? So we're introducing that into version 11 as well. So just an image of what that looks like is the OS disk is going to be looked after in exactly the same way as it was before, but we will leverage a proxy type system to be able to pull that data from that data disk, for example, a database server, into our backup repository. Also, from a NAS point of view, as well as the storage snapshot integration for the likes of so Dell EMC and NetApp, there's also the native change file tracking APIs that we've implemented against. So we're seeing a massive improvement around performance there as well. It just increases that change file tracking, understanding what's changed since the last backup. So ultimately, we're going to refer back to the snapshot rather than our change file tracking engine ourselves and understand what's changed, and then take that and store that as a backup. So another key part to what we've done. So there's three key areas, at least from a technologist point of view. The majority of this is not marketing. So it's around engine enhancements or management. So that's where the engine and the UI, and I didn't really get a chance to go into the weeds about that. The second was around platform. How do we enable more Linux? How do we enable you to do more with the workloads? And then finally is around automation. So those familiar with Veeam, we've been using a Veeam snap-in since very early on. And what we're bringing into version 11, and kind of this is focused on an enhancement. So this will get better, I'm sure. But it's a PowerShell module. But this will give us all of that functionality that we had before in a snap-in without having to load that snap-in. We'll just be able to do this with. We do have to have the console installed, but this will open up the doors to be able to do that without having that add Veeam snap-in command on every single script. But probably more importantly, around the automation piece. So those familiar with Veeam will know that our RESTful API today sits within our Enterprise Manager, and it's quite limited from a technology point of view. I can't create backup jobs. I have to use existing, or there's quite a few limitations. So what we've done is we've moved that down the stack into the management server, and it now runs as a service within the VBR server. And this does allow us to create jobs, modify jobs infrastructure configuration, things like being able to dynamically deploy and destroy Linux proxies because we don't need them up and running all day. Things like that will be out of the box available to be able to use and automate some of this, some of the processes and the configurations that you need within Veeam Backup Replication. So obviously I wanted to touch on the broader picture of Veeam, but then also I wanted to touch on the v11 and get really into that. I think it's important to note there's a few other things that's not it in true Veeam fashion. There's a lot of there's a long list. I'm sure there'll be that 150 features or functionality that get branded out at launch, and I'm sure the what's new guide will be 16 plus pages like v10. But really the focus is around engine enhancements. How do we do more with what we've got? So being agnostic to whatever that hardware may be, being able to enhance the UI without affecting everyone's day-to-day running of Veeam already today, which is the enhancement of being able to move, but without moving too fast that we leave some of our trusted customers behind. Enterprise Manager does get some more functionality as well, more so around localization more than anything. BCSPs, this is probably the biggest option, especially with the Linux and everything that's going on there. Veeam cloud service providers being able to offer Veeam services to their customers, there's a huge uptick in functionality that comes with v11. All of that Linux stuff that I mentioned, that storage integration, and I kind of glossed over it, but that's kind of a session in itself, looking at the storage integration for both agents and NAS. RESTful API, super excited from an automation point of view on what we can actually achieve there with some of our projects that we've been running on in the past around deploying using Terraform, etc., to be able to do that. The PowerShell module, again, is a step in the right direction for us to be able to continue what we're doing in that space around being able to automate and manage our systems. So the biggest question that you're all going to ask is, well, when will v11 be available? And this is a yearly thing for us at Veeam, is well, one, when it's ready, because we don't want to forgo our successful way of being able to launch software that is just going to work and just going to enable you to update, install, and off you go. You start protecting it. But let's say Q1 2020 is an out there comment from me. This QR code will take you to a landing page where you can find out more information. I know that our team, from a product strategy point of view, have done a lot of content around v11 already. So you can see things like storage field day, cloud field day, etc. Just Veeam On and Veeam Live. We touched on a lot more of these in a lot more detail. But with that, thank you for attending the breakout session. And yeah, thank you.